Let's talk about the multifaceted, nuanced aspect of queerness. Queer is an umbrella term that includes a wide range of different identities within it. We're going to break down the differences here. There's a difference between our sexual orientation, our anatomical sex, and our gender. Sexual orientation is who we are sexually into, who gets our blood pumping, who gets our heart rate bumping. Anatomical sex speaks to our sex assigned at birth, based on our physical body, based on our chromosomes. What are we classified as? Now, gender is not the same thing as sex assigned at birth. Gender is the lived experience of what it means to embody whatever the gender experience is that we're having. Primarily based on our anatomical sex, especially when we're younger, we get raised and shaped to be a girl or a boy. It starts even when we're in utero, right? And there are gender reveal parties and people who are buying us pink and blue things before we're even in a physical form out in the world. So anatomical sex speaks to the scientific aspects of biology. Gender speaks to the socialization and the lived experience of what we're taught in our brains, what we're socialized to believe it means to be a boy, a girl, etc., etc., etc. Very important point here. Now with gender, there's a couple things to break down in even deeper detail because there's also a difference between our gender identity and our gender expression. Gender identity is how we feel about ourselves. Regardless of how society has raised us, regardless of what our parents taught us it meant to be the thing that they said that we were, regardless of what those other children in our schools growing up taught us we were or were not supposed to do, gender identity is how do we feel about ourselves. Just like any other of our identities, it changes throughout the life course. We don't always want to be the same thing when we grow up, right? What you wanted to be when you were 3 versus 7 versus 15 versus 20 versus 30, 40, 50. That has changed and evolved over time. The things you like or don't like, other ways that you think about yourself, your age, all of these identities evolve with us over time. Gender is the same way. Maybe when you were a kid, you were a tomboy, and then you grew up and became more gendered in your assigned sex at birth. Maybe it was the reverse. Maybe as a child you were more gendered, and now you're finding that your relationship with your gender is different. Just to share my own experience, I think I really was kind of like a girly girl when I was little. I liked Barbies, I liked dolls. My gender identity has ebbed and flowed through time. I identified with my gender as a child and growing up, meaning that I identified with the sex I was assigned at birth. Then when I realized that there were other options and I started meeting people who were expansive in the way that they identified their gender, I realized I had a choice. And that changed the way that I experienced my identity. It gave me additional options that I hadn't considered before. And so I tried a few of them on. I went through a very butch phase. I went through a phase when I was like totally disconnected from any kind of gender at all. Now I'm in a hybrid phase where I'm like re-owning what it means to be feminine, even though I don't identify as a woman like I did before. So gender identity is an evolving personal thing, just like any of our deeper identities. Gender expression, on the other hand, is how are we communicating how we feel outwards into the world? What am I wearing to show you how I feel about myself? How is my hair styled? Do I wear makeup or not? I want to separate these pieces because how we feel and how we express, ideally those are the same, right? Ideally we feel safe enough, confident enough. Ideally we have enough support to be brave enough to step out and show in our expression the way that we feel inside. But very often in this society, especially with these ongoing attacks on transgender people, people don't feel safe expressing their truth. So someone's expression may or may not match their true identity. So I want to bring this forth just because we can't make assumptions based on how people express. So many of us maybe haven't even asked ourselves the question about, do we really identify with the gender that other people have assigned to us? So let's think a little bit more about what it means that gender is socialized by society. Have you ever heard any of these phrases? Be a man. Hey, can I get a smile? Where are you going? Ow, ow. What's the socializing message here? When young boys in our society are told be a man, what does that mean? Don't cry. Don't be vulnerable. Don't be feminine. Don't express your emotions. Don't do that thing that only girls are supposed to do. Toughen up. Be stoic. Men are allowed to have 2 emotions. Are they even allowed to have 2 emotions? They're allowed to be angry and happy, I guess. Men are not allowed to be sad, vulnerable, hurt, etc. On the other hand, this is how females are often raised. I know I was getting catcalled in the street when I was like 13, 14 years old if I was walking somewhere. And what kind of messages does that teach us about our bodies and what we're here for and what we're here to offer other people? Growing up and being socialized as a woman, socialized as a female, was harmful and damaging for me in some ways because it taught me that how I looked and how I responded to other people was more important than what I felt and what I wanted for myself. We all suffer from the ways that we're socialized with these toxic kind of gender messages. So this one too. Which one is the man? You already know. How do you know? Because we're heavily socialized in this culture to be taught and believe that women should be hairless. Now, that's not a natural thing. That's not nature. That's like a cultural condition. If I go to other cultures around the world, they don't have those same expectations. That's not connected to someone's sex. That's connected to the socialization of us being taught what we're supposed to believe gender is. Why do women have to be hairless? Why? Same thing here. I Googled gifts for men, gifts for women. What's the difference that you see between these two categories? How do they make you feel when you look at these different images here? With the men category, it's rough and tough stuff. It's video games, it's belts, it's technology, it's suitcases, luggage, stuff to travel, be adventurous. With the women stuff, it's shavers and lotions and soaps and workout stuff. Again, very focused on appearance. Googled toys for boys versus toys for girls. Similar things we're seeing here. All of these images are socializations. None of this is connected to the reality of what it means to be born male versus born female. Are there some innate natural differences between sexes? Yes, but we are the ones who assign so much meaning on gender by the ways that we are raised. We are teaching people who to be. We are teaching people how to perform their gender from the time that they're in utero and we're buying pink and blue. Did you know that pink actually used to be the boy color? If you go back in time, you can find that pink was seen as a masculine color, the history of this country specifically. So even in the few hundred years that this country has been in existence, we've seen major shifts and changes in what it means to be a boy versus what it means to be a girl. Little boy babies used to get dressed up in dresses too. But along the way, culture changed and shifted, and now that is not what we consider appropriate anymore. So all of this is a choice. That's the point here. All of this is a choice. Boys might have more energy by nature. Men might have larger bodies and stronger bodies that are able to do certain things physically that women can't, just like women have bodies that do certain physical things that men can't. But we add on these extra meanings that it dictates what we can and can't like, that it dictates what we can and can't wear, that it dictates whether we can have hair on our body or not. Like, that's just ridiculous. That has nothing to do with anything. Why do we have to have all these stupid rules? So these final three pieces that I want to leave you in thinking about gender is that it's socially constructed. This is the whole point. They're not biologically fixed rules. They're things that we have socially created and constructed from our ideas, our evolving, changing, shifting ideas of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and how do we want to enforce those rules as a society. This image I find amusing. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Actually, beauty is a social construct and therefore has no basis for objection and evaluation. Like, this is the game that we're playing with gender, right? Society brings up a hammer. If we try to deviate from it, then we get scared back into complying, even though in reality it's bullshit. It's also something that is fluctuating and evolving across the individual life course and as a society as a whole. Kinsey's scale, created by Alfred Kinsey back in, I think, like the 1940s, was one person who was measuring this, and he found that there was a lot of deviation in people's sexual behavior that was not apparent on the surface but was happening behind closed doors. So he found that there's a scale where it's actually pretty rare that people are on those extreme ends where they're exclusively 100% homosexual and exclusively 100% heterosexual. Most of us fall somewhere in between. We see this with changes in pronoun usage and more young people identifying as non-binary. We're seeing those changes and fluctuations and evolutions over time as we as a country begin to have different, more nuanced conversations and increased awareness about the wide prevalence and variety of queerness. So I want to end with this note on gender policing. Gender policing is the way that we teach and enforce gender in this society. I actually studied this when I was working towards a PhD in sociology. I took a class on educational inequality, and one of the books I studied was called Dude, You're a Fag, which is a sociological research study that was turned into a book that talks about a sociologist's experience planting herself within a middle school. I think it was a middle school, maybe a high school, and observing all the nuanced ways that gender was enforced, both by other students onto one another and by teachers and by the administration onto the students too. So the title of the book, Dude, You're a Fag, is one of the main ways that gender was enforced amongst these young boys. By calling each other like, hey, you're a fag, you're being gay, that's a sign for that boy to stop doing whatever the feminine thing is that they're doing and learn to toughen up and harden up and be a man and do all those other things so as to avoid being teased by their peers. So this is a socialization process that we inflict upon ourselves and we inflict upon one another. It's taught to us by basis of what we're taught in this culture and this society about queerness, which comes directly from colonialism, and colonialism does not want us to be free, be diverse, be different, deviate from the box, realize that we have power, realize we don't have to play under capitalism's game. So gender is one of those ways that we are boxed in and taught, this is who you are. Don't go over there, don't look over there, don't wonder about what's possible, stay in the box, stay in the box. So I want to invite you to think about, is there a way that you police other people's genders? Is that something that still comes up for you now? Do you tell people sit like a lady or big boys don't cry? And then I want to encourage you, let's take this a level deeper and let's think about your own experience coming up in your body. We have all experienced this conditioning. We have all had our gender policed in this culture. So I want to invite you to recall a time when that was happening to you. What's a time that you experienced gender and or sexuality policing by others because you were going against the norm? What do you remember feeling? What do you remember thinking at the time? What was your reaction at the time? How did you change or adjust your behavior? And most importantly, how did that moment shape you? How did it change the way that you thought about yourself and what you thought you were or were not allowed to do? How did you change yourself as a result of that moment? What might have happened if instead of your behavior being targeted and said, nope, don't do that, what might have happened if you were encouraged and allowed to fully express who you wanted to be without restriction? Maybe you might have gotten teased down the line. Sure, there's a lot of gender socialization that happens through high school. But what could have been the silver lining of your authentic expression being encouraged? What part of you has had to suffocate, maybe even die, as a result of being squashed and being pressed into that box? Is there a part of you that still feels this? Does that part of you still feel this? Can you set it free a little bit? Can you give yourself the permission now that you weren't given when you were younger? It is never healthy to have our authenticity suppressed. It is never healthy to have to change who we innately naturally are to appease other people and fit into the boxes that society has constructed for us. That's never healthy for our spirit. It always leaves part of ourselves feeling like it's suffering. It leads to internal suffering. It leads to mental illness. It leads to physical illness. So now, as an adult or an older person who's watching this, what kind of healing can you offer yourself? What kind of radical permission can you offer yourself? How can you allow yourself to be a little bit more authentic and allow the other people around you to be a little bit more authentic too? Because there's power in our authenticity. There's power in our radical self-expression. And that's something that society can try to squash, but it's something that can never be taken away from us. Who we are inside can never be taken away from us. Sometimes we just might be the one who has to give ourselves that permission. So I encourage you to think about what it would look like to give that permission to yourself and to recognize that there's so many spaces, places, people, populations that are fully accepting of all of your diversity, all of your authenticity, the wholeness of who you are. So regardless of your circumstances right now, if you're not in places where people understand and conceptualize things this way, keep it in your heart and your spirit and your gut that it's out there. Let yourself believe that those spaces are out there and that you can find them if you go out and explore a little bit in a place of your authenticity. Mwah.